Hi, welcome to Storytime with Dad Booker. Appreciate you being here and look forward to reading the next two chapters today. After today, we only have one chapter left, so we're almost at the end, which is kind of breaking my heart because I really enjoyed this book. I hope you're enjoying it. And the next book we're going to be reading is book two of Soul Man, which where's it's over here, and that's going to be Rogue's Gallery. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm already working on the next book of Sheriff of the Small Town 4. Don't have a title yet, but it's got some interesting chapters already. So we're going to do two today. The first one is Founders Day. Rocky leaned back in his chair and relaxed. Morgan had a workable plan and had contacted enough people that the Founders Day festival was possible. He turned to Mrs. Werther of the Preservation Society. How many people can you accommodate in the places we're showing? She checked her charts and brought them to the fire marshal to check. He looked them over based on square footage, exits, and clearances and okayed the list. She handed the list to Rocky, who handed it to Morgan. He swiveled to look at his secretary. I think he said we had vehicles for transporting people to the tours. She pulled a sheet from the folder on her lap and handed it over. Well, we should be all right with this. Morgan, what's your expectation on attendees? Well, we're figuring on over 5,000 and just below 7,000. He laughed. Problem was finding enough porta potties to support that number. Talbot suggested we dig sanitary trenches, but I think we can get by without having to resort to that. Rocky thought that trenches might not be a bad idea. Dig it out and fill it back in. Hold on one second. Didn't realize doing Morgan was going to ruin my voice. There we go. Didn't help at all. Rocky thought the trenches might not be a bad idea. Dig it out and fill it in. A quick check of the daytime temperatures, however, for the day of the festival definitely vetoed out the trenches. All right, folks. I think we got everything set. Josh, will you please double check a week before we open? If there are any problems, we'll still have time for alternatives. Josh nodded and gathered all the files and he and Morgan had brought. Rocky headed to his office and checked the weather again. The day of the festival still looked good, but since it was costing plenty to put it on, he was hoping for sunshine and cool breezes. Lucas had struck the treasury, and it was taking a long time for the courts to get him to give it back. The more time that was wasted, the less there was to recover. Things worked out, the coffers would fill again, and they would begin to rebuild. If not, then they would fall behind, and it would be pushing things to handle doing even the regular events. Called Josh to keep getting the word out and get people into town. Josh could feel the worry consuming Rocky. As mayor, he had stemmed the tide of corruption, but the damage already done was significant. Rocky wanted to accomplish as much as possible without raising taxes or penalizing anyone. He had those alternative plans laid out just in case. As the weeks turned to days, the festival looked as if it was going to be successful. Hotels near them were filling up. People were coming into town just to look it over. The diner and hot dog hut were making money hand over fist, and the other shops were beginning to thrive once more. As Rocky walked around, he heard how excited people were to attend the festival. The draw seemed to be the petting zoo, demonstrations, and concert. Rocky went to the field to check on setup and liked what Morgan had organized. As always, it was efficiently laid out and would keep people moving. Talbot and Joe were talking to the different sections regarding taking their deposits to the bank. The bank would keep a special window to take in the deposits and issue receipts. Joe had fitted his motorcycle with a small safe that would keep the money secure. Rocky was surprised at the food booths being erected. It seemed there were more than were on the list. Team for helping with parking were receiving maps and instructions as well as flyers for the day's events, complete with a timetable. Mrs. Werther had her team in the bleachers going over tours and checking them on local history. Rocky had periodically led teams of people and appreciated that with the right team, magic could happen. With the wrong one, things could get ugly pretty quick. As far as he was concerned, his job was to make sure everyone had what they needed to do their job. A flatbed truck came in loaded with porta potties and stopped. Josh ran over and showed them where to drop them off at. Another truck came with the liquid to fill them. In fact, Josh was running all over the field. Rocky called Agnes, and she brought his bike that he hadn't ridden in a long time. He handed it over to Josh, who was thrilled as it was a Schwinn Super Sport. Mounting it, he tore around the field at top speed. The truck with the garbage cans arrived and laid down a pallet of them. For a while, people casually strolled over and retrieved as many as they needed. The petting zoo was already installed, and several farmers were sitting around watching over their stock. The lambs were a popular favorite, receiving attention from everyone who passed. Farmers market was getting stocked twice as many people as usual had made carts. Okay, we'll do this again. The farmers market need more tea. Now where was I? Farmers market was getting stocked with twice as many people as usual had made cakes, tarts, jams, and jellies, breads, and rolls. Fruit of every description grown on their farms was in bushel baskets ready for sale. In the back and roped off were tents where all the people who working the event could sleep for the next 4 days if they wanted to stay on site. The band had a converted mobile home that Greg Border owned for when they did state contests. Joe was one of the featured singers. Rocky went home seeing that everything was under control and there wasn't anything he could do to help. It was all in Morgan and Josh's capable hands. Rocky was up early. He had planned on getting everything ready and letting Agnes sleep in. But she was already up, dressed, and had Mary ready. She had packed a basket and bag and had bottles and ice and everything else that would need for a day out. Rocky figured the way she was acting that she might believe he had plans to leave her behind. She had her own car now and could have gone anyways, but wanted them to go as a family. Arriving at his office loaded down with a carriage, bags, baskets, he was just in time for the parade. A limo pulled up, donated by Ralph's Pretty Good Cars. On the side was a placard with his name and picture. The back seat was raised and the top down. Led Agnes and Mary in first, then got in and closed the door. Behind the band, ready themselves to play Final Countdown, or, well, a version of it that the band director had come up with. Agnes was stuffing Mary's ears with cotton. The limo started off, thankfully putting some distance between them and the band. Rocky and Agnes felt ridiculous being on show for the crowd, but they waved and held up Mary, who promptly threw up. Rocky was laughing so hard he wasn't much help at first. They circled the town twice and made their way to the field dubbed for the festival, Founders Field. Agnes stayed while Rocky rode on the back of Joe's motorcycle back into town to get the carriage and everything else Agnes had packed. If he hadn't been there, it was doubtful that so much baggage would have been allowed in the van, but rank has its privileges, and for once Rocky was glad of it. Rocky was expected to make an opening speech on the band platform. He opened the festival with a short, impromptu, humorous speech, then got out of the band's way. All day, he half worked and half enjoyed the festival. Josh seemed to be everywhere at once, taking pictures and checking everything was running smoothly. Joe had fetched Peggy, and she decided to help out at the petting zoo. Seeing Agnes and Mary, she waved them over. Agnes squatted down so that Mary could touch the sheep and chicks. An inquisitive goat went through the bag, slung over her shoulder, and latched onto a bottle that was enjoying the contents. Peggy chased the goat, who ran around the pen and laughed as it continued to consuming the formula. Peggy retrieved the bottle and put it back in the bag. Farmers just sat there and laughed. Agnes waved to Talbot, who was doing his rounds of the field and then heading into town in order to drive or walk around there. Being tall and in uniform, there was no doubt Law's presence was keeping thieves and problems at bay. Joe was having a grand time picking up the bags from the vendors and taking them to the bank for deposit. He'd bring back the receipts, which were checked against the deposit tickets. After a while, they stopped checking, knowing everything was in safe hands. Joe spent a while with Peggy and also on stage singing popular songs and ballads. A few times he called in Talbot to do a duet with him. Michaela arrived with Larry, and Talbot took him while he was singing, holding him to the microphone. Talbot only had one problem the first day when a few out of towners got upset that there wasn't any alcohol. Festival without beer wasn't a festival for them, and they were becoming annoying. Talbot walked over casually and informed them that they could A, settle down, B, go to town and visit the Triple RX and drink their fill, or C, leave the festival in town altogether. They immediately asked for directions for the Triple RX and caught the next van heading into town. Word got around that they were joined by Horace, who came in and drank companionably with them. People passing by stopped in and took pictures. The second and third days were primarily for demonstrations of ancient crafts, and the crowds sat around with materials and made baskets, braided yarn from wool, learned about making furniture without nails but using joining or pegs. Bill Collins taught making string instruments and playing the items he made. Once he started playing, people gravitated over and stayed. Agnes was fascinated by the basket weaving and created several baskets, vowing to make more as a hobby. Fourth day ended with an ice cream social and more singing from Joe, still in uniform. Agnes and Michaela and Peggy also sang some old Andrew sister songs. Tiki torches were lit as the sun went down and people began to depart. The farmers got their animals in the trucks to take them home. Most of the saleable items had gone with visitors, and what was left was given to workers for free. Morgan was wandering around with Julia on his arm and looking exhausted, but satisfied. Well, Mayor, I think our first Founders Festival was a success. I checked, and we should have added about 40,000 to the kitty after everything's been paid. We're back in the black, boss. Rocky shook his hand, then hugged him. So much was riding on this, he was relieved that it was a success, but also that it was over. All right, let's do the next chapter. Wrong choice. Marvin, I'd really like you to come with us today. We're bringing the kids to the Home Historical Society, and all they've been talking about is the law, as they call it. To see you standing there in person and all that you have accomplished will be, well, the highlight of the trip. Ex-Sheriff Marvin Morgan shuffled his feet in embarrassment. Honey, things I did back then were necessary and usually not family friendly. That law was useful back in the day. It allowed the criminals to know to watch out, that the sheriff and deputy of this town were not going to be pushed around and will tackle anything. Our reputation was our armor. Well, I took that armor off years ago, and Talbot wears it now. Well, Talbot and Joe, and before that, Rocky and Talbot. I don't want to spend my golden years living in the past. I want to look forward to life with you and our granddaughter. I just want to be Marvin Morgan now. She looked into his eyes and read the truth. He just wanted to have things quiet and normal. He was tired with the notoriety of past exploits and shouldered him with. All right, come as my husband. Wear a cap and an old jacket, and they won't recognize you. They'll just see you as a nice man who accompanied their teacher's aide. Morgan found an old cloth cap in the closet and a worn jacket. He looked in the mirror, and she was right. He didn't look like the retired sheriff anymore. Taking her arm, he escorted her to her car. Across town, a boy of 14 was reading the reply to a letter he had sent a girl. Tommy, sorry, but I don't feel that about you like that. I'd say let's be friends, but you don't want friendship, so it's better we just stay away from each other. Crystal. He crumpled the letter and threw it across the room. He was tired of his loneliness, of the constant insults and laughter of the boys and girls at school, especially from the girls. He looked at himself in the mirror. His face was clear, his teeth straight, he was in decent shape. So what the hell was wrong with him that they didn't want to be near him? True, he was shorter than most every girl in his class, but was that the reason to treat him the way they did? To call him Dobble Boy? To pat him on the head and laugh at him? Some of the teachers even did that. The more he thought about it, the more it hurt. The more it hurt, the more angrier he got. Seemed to him as if he'd been angry for a long time. Under his mattress was his father's gun. He'd taken it from his father's gun safe the last time his dad got drunk and left it open. Put the gun to his head and tried to work up the courage to pull. His anger stayed his hand more than his anguish. He wasn't going to go alone. He'd take some of them with him. Them and anyone who tried to stop him. Morgan was pleased to be just a grandpa to the class. He sat with them during story times, played with the puppets, making them talk to them and sang songs to them on the ride over to the Historical Society. Julia was seeing more relaxed side of him than she'd seen in a while. Maybe it really was time for him to retire for good and just take things easy. At the Historical Society, he stepped away while they surveyed the law wall. Hell, the wall was over 50% his. Rocky and Talbot took up most of the rest. He was proud of the job they had done and that Talbot and Joe were doing now. He felt towards. Sorry. Uh, he was he felt towards Talbot as if he was one of the family as much as Rocky. The moment the children moved away from the wall, they looked around for him. Once they found him, they grabbed his hand so he wouldn't get lost again. He smiled at his young protectors. They went to the section that held toys from long ago and were able to play with replicas. A boy of 6 handed him a monkey so he could play with something too. He held it bewildered, wondering what to do with it. Finally held it as he did Mary. On the bus back to school, the children sang and joked. They were going to the auditorium where they were going to show an old movie about what the town looked like years ago. Tommy was walking towards the school. He faked a stomach ache and had been allowed to stay home. Once he opened the letter, his ache became real. Almost a block away, he saw the kids at the gated area playing. He called out and waved. Some pointed and laughed. Some turned their backs. One or two waved absently, but the rest just ignored him. For him, it was the final straw. He took the gun from his pocket and fired without aiming. The bullet ricocheted off the wall and bounced somewhere. The adults heard the children. Herded the children swiftly inside and locked the door. Morgan heard the gunshot as though from far away while sitting at the back of the auditorium. Screams of frightened people were near, and Morgan roared for the people in the auditorium to go downstairs and lock the door. Julia waited for him to come down as well, but he was already out the door and into the hallway. Well, the children came first, so she did as he had said. Down to the basement, she found an old phone and called Talbot. Morgan heard someone trying to force the door. Seeing that they were unable to get in, he went to the office and had them ring the alarm for active shooter. School had had drills recently, so they knew what to do. Morgan raced around, checking to make sure no one was out of a room and in danger. Tommy knew the school well. In times of depression, he'd often walk the halls or sit in the boys' room thinking. The boys' room window on the first floor was broken, wouldn't lock, and was difficult to close. He found it as he had expected, open enough that he could crawl in. He squeezed through and dropped down. Checking to make sure he still had his gun, he opened the bathroom door and peered through a crack. Opening the door a little wider, he saw the back of a man standing, just looking around. He aimed for the man in his sights. The door creaked slightly, and Morgan turned swiftly. Seeing the barrel of a gun, he kicked the door closed. Seeking protection in the short time available to him, he ran towards the janitor's closet. His speed was a little slower than it used to be, and he was caught. Tommy came out and had his gun pointed straight for Morgan. Outside, Talbot was near the office door. He called in and had them open so he could handle the situation. The sight of the sheriff eased their fears. They let him in and pointed him down the hall. Talbot emerged to see a small boy holding a gun pointing his way, and Morgan between himself and the child. Morgan was trying to talk to the boy. Trouble was that he was speaking to the boy as a man. The boy was becoming frustrated. "Shut up, old man! You don't know what you're talking about. Morgan took a step closer, speaking calmly and casually as if to an old friend. All I'm saying is things can be. The boy took a step backwards and raised the gun higher. Shut up! The boy screamed. Talbot ordered Morgan out of the way. Morgan, the former sheriff, was not going to let Talbot shoot a child. Stand down, Talbot. I've got everything under control. Unfortunately, he did not. The boy squeezed the trigger with eyes closed, and Morgan spun on his heel, clearing the way for Talbot to take a disarming shot. He shot Tommy in the arm, dropping the gun, and tried to reach down and pick it up with his other hand. Morgan was lying, bleeding. Talbot would deal with him after Tommy was secure. He dove for the gun, sliding on the polished floor, and reached his seconds before Tommy. Grabbing an ankle as he slid past, Tommy fell to the floor, and Talbot rolled up, leaping, and grabbed the boy who was cuffed before he knew what happened. His wound was superficial, and though bleeding slightly, his shirt was clean, and as the blood dried, sealing the wound. Talbot was more worried about Morgan, who had a chest wound. The fact that he was still bleeding and breathing comforted him. Checking the wound, he felt it sucking against the palm of his hand. Taking a card from his wallet, he placed it over the wound and tied his and Morgan's handkerchiefs together at the corners. Wrapping it around Morgan's chest, he tied another knot over the wound. He called for the office to send an ambulance and was relieved that they had already done so. They were waiting outside. Well, let him in, he called out, and they burst through with the stretcher. As he put Morgan on the gurney, his eyes opened, and he saw the boy sitting on the floor crying. He had a slight wound on his arm, but he was alive. Closing his eyes, he rested as they bore him to the hospital. Tommy, too, was transported, and Talbot went with him. Young as he was still a prisoner. Tommy was remanded to the state, and Talbot hightailed it to the hospital after informing Joe of what had happened. At the hospital, he sat and waited with Rocky, Agnes, Mary, and Julia. He took Rocky aside and explained what happened. Damn fool got between me and the kid. I ordered him to move, and he told me to stand down. Rocky, we got to find some way to make him understand he isn't the sheriff anymore, and to let me and Joe handle things. Rocky looked down the hall to the room where they were operating on Morgan. Well, we will if he lives. The doctor came out of the operating room shaking his head. He was exhausted since Morgan's operation was his 10th of the day. Because of that, he lacked his usual comforting manner. His face was long, and he looked as exhausted as he felt. Opening the door, he stood looking into the eyes of Morgan's family. Picking out Julia, he spoke softly. Mrs. Morgan, your husband. Julia, who had been expecting the worst, broke down and cried. Agnes leapt to her side and Rocky to the other. The doctor began again, speaking quickly so that they would hear all what he had to say. Mrs. Morgan, your husband made it through with flying colors. Having gotten this out all in one breath, he slowed down. Damn, he's an amazing man. That bullet missed his heart and lungs by less than an inch, and the sheriff's quick first aid prevented further damage. We'll let him rest a bit in recovery, but he's already clamoring to go home. Something about an Italian dinner waiting. Julia put her hand to her face. Oh, Lord, I haven't even got the meat for it yet. Morgan was allowed to leave as soon as possible due to the fact he was impossible to keep in bed resting. Rocky drove them home to Julia's as she was too shaky to drive. Agnes brought their car. Close behind was Talbot in the squad car, bringing up the rear. At home, Morgan was settled in his easy chair and looked comfortable and relaxed. Sensed up when Talbot approached and leaned menacingly as they were face to face. Morgan, you ever get between me and a person I am aimed to apprehend, I will shoot you in the ass. You tell me to stand down again, and I'll shoot you in both cheeks. Talbot smiled, and Morgan laughed, but knew Talbot had a point. You really did need to relax and trust others to do their job. Shook Talbot's hand and apologized. Well, that's it for today. We could, I guess, what time is it? 10:23. We could do the last chapter, but I just hate to get done that quick. So that's it for today then. Next one will be the final chapter, big hit for our small town. And then we're done with Sheriff of Small Town 3. So I really hope you're enjoying this book. I hope you had a good time listening in. Next one, as I said, will be Soul Man 2, Rogues Gallery. So we'll do that next Friday. I don't know how many chapters we'll be doing first, but we'll see. So that's it for today. I appreciate you being here. Hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing you again on Tuesday. So until then, be good and be good to yourself. Bye.